The sun had barely risen over the crowded streets of Manila, but already the air was thick with the sounds of vendors calling out prices, jeepneys honking, and children chasing each other down the narrow alleyways. Amid the chaos of everyday survival, there was one sound that stood apart, fragile at first, then swelling with a beauty that didn't belong to the crumbling slum. It was the sound of a piano. The instrument, if one could still call it that, sat crookedly in the corner of a tiny shack patched together with wood scraps and tin sheets. Its once ivory keys were now yellowed and chipped, its body scarred with cracks and missing panels. To anyone else, it was junk, something to be tossed aside, but to 12-year-old Amara de la Cruz it was treasure. Amara's father Tomas had found the piano months earlier outside a junk shop where it had been abandoned. He had no money to fix it, but he bartered with the shop owner to let him take it home for free. With the help of neighbors, he hauled it through the streets like a prize won from fate. When he brought it into their one-room home, his wife laughed and shook her head. "Tomas, we can't even afford rice tonight, and you bring home this broken thing." But Tomas only smiled and placed his calloused hand on Amara's shoulder. "It's for her," he said softly. "Our daughter has music in her blood. Even a broken piano will sing if she touches it." At first, Amara didn't know what to do with it. She had never touched a piano before. But something about the keys called to her. Each evening, after helping her mother sell vegetables in the market and doing her chores, she would sit on the old wooden stool and press the keys one by one, listening carefully. Some were stubborn and wouldn't play, others gave off a muffled sound. But enough worked for her to begin experimenting. Her neighbors noticed quickly. Children from the alley would sneak into the doorway, peeking inside to watch her. They'd giggle when she made mistakes, clap when a tune finally came together. Slowly, Amara learned to copy the melodies she heard in church, on the radio, or sometimes drifting in from the city streets where wealthy families had real music teachers. She had no sheet music, no guide, just her ears, her memory, and her stubborn persistence. The piano became her escape. For Amara, life was a daily struggle. Her family lived below the poverty line, relying on her mother's small vegetable stand and her father's occasional work as a carpenter. There were days when meals consisted of nothing but rice with salt. Nights when the electricity cut out, leaving them in darkness. Amara knew what it felt like to watch her parents argue quietly about unpaid bills, to pretend she wasn't hungry so her younger brother could eat more. But the piano changed everything. When she sat down to play, the world outside faded. Hunger, heat, and hardship dissolved in the air, replaced by the vibration of notes that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond her small, worn hands. Her fingers danced awkwardly at first, then with surprising grace. Sometimes she would close her eyes and imagine herself on a stage, under bright lights, with an audience that listened not out of pity, but out of awe. One evening, as the sky glowed orange and the neighborhood prepared for sleep, Amara's father leaned against the doorway, listening. His clothes were damp with sweat, his hands stained with wood shavings from a long day's labor. But his tired face softened as he heard the music. "Anak," he said after she finished a simple lullaby, "One day, the world will hear you. Not just our neighbors, not just this street, the world." Amara turned toward him, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "Papa, how? We don't even have money for a music teacher. And this piano," she tapped a broken key that made no sound. "It's not even whole." Her father walked over, knelt beside her, and placed his rough hand gently on her small one. "Great music doesn't come from perfect keys, Anak. It comes from here." He touched her chest where her heart beat fast. "And yours is louder than any piano." From then on, Amara practiced every day, even when her fingers ached, even when she was tired from selling vegetables in the hot sun, even when her stomach growled from skipped meals. She would sit at the piano, close her eyes, and let her heart guide her hands. The neighborhood grew to love her music. Families would pause outside her home just to listen. Children hummed the tunes she created while playing. One old woman, who lived 2 houses away, told Amara's mother, "Your daughter's music, it makes me forget my pain. It makes me believe there's still beauty in this life." Amara didn't realize it, but she was already changing lives around her. Still, she dreamed of more. At night, when her little brother snored softly beside her on their thin mat, she whispered to the ceiling, "Someday, I'll play on a real stage. Someday, I'll make Papa proud." She had no idea that across the ocean, in a place she had only seen on television, a stage called America's Got Talent was waiting for her. And one day that dream, the one born on a broken piano in a Manila alley, would carry her farther than she ever imagined. The flight from Manila to Los Angeles had felt like a dream, one that Amara half expected to wake from at any moment. She had never even been on a plane before, let alone crossed an ocean. The world outside her window seemed endless. Clouds stretching like fields of cotton, cities glittering like jewels far below. Her father held her hand tightly during the landing, whispering, "Remember, Anak, no matter what happens, we are already blessed to be here." But nothing prepared her for the sheer magnitude of the America's Got Talent stage. the day of her audition. Amara stood backstage in a line of hopefuls. Some were dancers stretching with professional poise, others were singers rehearsing scales with powerful voices. She clutched her simple dress, a hand-me-down from her cousin, and stared at the polished grand piano waiting on stage. Compared to her chipped, broken piano back home, it looked like something from another world. Its black surface gleamed under the stage lights, each key flawless and smooth. Her stomach twisted with nerves. She remembered the cracked keys of her old piano, the tin roof home she had left behind, and wondered, what if I don't belong here? What if I fail in front of everyone? A stagehand with a clipboard approached her. Mara Delacroix, you're next. Her father knelt down in front of her, his eyes steady and full of love. Anak, remember what I told you. The music doesn't come from the piano, it comes from you. Close your eyes if you must, and just let them hear your heart. She nodded, clutching the small rosary her mother had given her, then handed it back to her father for safekeeping. As her name was called, she stepped forward into the blinding light. The stage stretched out before her like a vast ocean. Thousands of faces filled the audience seats, a sea of eyes watching her every move. The 4 judges sat at their desk: Edie, Sophia Howie and Simon Cowell. Simon leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his famous skeptical expression already in place. He looked at the timid little girl standing alone in the center of the stage, and Amara could almost hear his thoughts: too young. Too unprepared. Another nervous child who won't last more than a minute. A voice came through the speakers. Hello there, what's your name? Amara swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she answered. My name is Amara, I'm 12 years old and I'm from the Philippines. The audience murmured with surprise. Even the judges sat up straighter. Simon raised an eyebrow. 12. And what are you going to do for us today? Amara glanced at the piano, her palms damp with sweat. I will play the piano. There was a pause. A girl from a poor country, barely tall enough to sit comfortably at the bench, claiming she could play one of the most difficult instruments. The judges exchanged glances. A few in the audience chuckled softly, doubtful. Simon tilted his head. And did you teach yourself, or do you have a teacher? Amara shook her head quickly. No teacher. I just listened and learned. The skepticism deepened. Simon sighed lightly, as though preparing himself for a disappointment. All right then, Amara, the stage is yours. She walked to the piano slowly, her legs trembling. When she sat down on the polished bench, the seat felt too big, the keys too perfect. For a moment she froze, staring at her reflection in the glossy black surface. Her father's words echoed in her mind. It doesn't come from the keys, it comes from here. She pressed her palm against her chest, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. Then she placed her fingers on the keys. The first note rang out, pure and clear as crystal. The sound filled the massive theater, echoing into every corner. Amara felt the vibration travel up her arms and into her soul. Suddenly, it was no longer a perfect piano on a terrifying stage. It was just her, the broken girl from Manila, speaking the only language she truly knew: music. Her hands began to move faster, finding patterns, weaving melodies she had practiced late into the night. The piece she chose was her own creation, born from the sadness of her family's struggles and the hope that kept them alive. Every rise in the music carried the echo of hunger she had endured, every fall spoke of the quiet nights when she dreamed of a brighter future. The audience grew quiet, the kind of silence that is heavier than sound. Heidi leaned forward, her lips parted. Sophia covered her heart with her hand. Howie's eyebrows lifted, stunned, and Simon, known for his cold, often brutal critiques, slowly uncrossed his arms, his eyes locked on the little girl at the piano. By the second minute, something began to change in the air. People in the audience looked at each other, wide-eyed, whispering, "She's incredible." Amara's small frame seemed almost to vanish as the music took over, filling the stage with a force far larger than her size. Her fingers moved effortlessly, like they had been trained by the greatest masters, but the truth was simpler: she had been trained by life itself. By hunger, by love, by the resilience of her father's faith. Simon, who had remained silent, leaned closer, his jaw tightening. For the first time in a long while his eyes softened, not with pity, but with genuine awe. And still Amara played on, her face calm, her eyes closed, as if she were back home in Manila with the broken piano that had raised her. When the final notes began to fade, she let her fingers linger on the keys a moment longer, reluctant to let go. Then, with a trembling exhale, she lifted her hands and opened her eyes. For a heartbeat the room remained utterly still, no sound, no movement, and then, the audience erupted, a roar of cheers, clapping, whistles, and shouts of astonishment. The theater shook with the force of their standing ovation. People were on their feet, waving their hands in the air, some even wiping away tears. Amara's eyes widened. She had never seen anything like it. Back home her audience was a handful of neighbors. Here it was thousands of strangers rising together in one voice of admiration. She glanced toward the judges. Heidi was clapping furiously, Sophia was wiping her eyes, and Howie mouthed the word, "Wow." But it was Simon's reaction that made Amara's heart skip. he wasn't clapping, he wasn't speaking. He just sat there, staring at her with a look she couldn't quite rid, part disbelief, part wonder, part something softer that felt almost fatherly. And then, slowly, Simon smiled. For Amara, that single smile meant more than any trophy. The final echo of Amara's opening piece had barely faded when she took another deep breath and, without hesitation, let her hands return to the keys. She wasn't finished, not yet. What came next wasn't planned, wasn't rehearsed, and wasn't part of any audition checklist. It was instinct. She began to play a melody that she had carried inside her since she was little. It was the music of her life, fragments of lullabies her mother used to hum while cooking, the church hymns she heard drifting through open doors, the rhythms of rain pounding against their tin roof, and the quiet sadness of nights when her family had nothing to eat. Each note was a memory. Each chord was a prayer. The audience felt it immediately. The theater, so loud with cheers moments earlier, fell into a reverent hush. It was as if everyone had collectively agreed to hold their breath. Amara's small frame swayed slightly as her fingers moved. She closed her eyes, letting herself disappear into the music. The girl who once doubted she belonged here was gone. In her place was a storyteller, one who needed no words. Every rise in the melody painted a picture of hope, a glimpse of dreams too fragile to speak aloud. Every fall in the harmony carried sorrow, raw and unfiltered. The balance between the two was what made her playing unforgettable. She was not just performing, she was confessing. Heidi clasped her hands together, whispering, "Oh my God." Sophia leaned forward, her eyes brimming. This is something else," she murmured. Even Howie, known for his humor and lightness, sat unusually still, his gaze fixed on the child at the piano as though he were afraid to miss a single note. And Simon Cowell, the man who had built a reputation on his ruthless honesty, remained frozen in place. His chin rested on his hand, his eyes narrowing not in skepticism but in something far deeper. He wasn't just listening, he was remembering. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he thought of his own child, of how fragile yet powerful innocence could be. The camera caught his expression, and for a moment, millions watching at home saw a different Simon, less the critic, more the father. Amara's piece grew more intense, her fingers moving faster, her small body leaning into the weight of the chords. The music now roared with urgency, painting storms and struggles, as though she were pouring every hardship her family had endured directly into the keys. In her mind, she was back in Manila, sitting at the broken piano with chipped keys. She saw her father carrying lumber on his back, sweat dripping into his eyes. She saw her mother, exhausted after a long day at the market, still smiling as she handed her children the last piece of bread. She saw her little brother asleep beside her on their mat, clutching her hand for comfort. And she saw herself, the girl who had whispered to the ceiling, promising that someday, she would make her family proud. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't stop. If anything, they fueled her. She let the sorrow bend into beauty, the pain transform into strength. Every emotion she had bottled up over 12 years of struggle poured out of her in a storm of sound. People in the audience were crying openly now. Parents held their children tighter. Strangers reached for tissues. The music had crossed every barrier of language, culture, and circumstance. For those few minutes, everyone in the room felt what Amara felt. The judges weren't immune either. Heidi wiped her cheeks, trying not to smudge her makeup. Sophia's lips trembled as she whispered, "Dios mío." Howie leaned back, shaking his head slowly in disbelief. And Simon's eyes shone with tears he didn't bother to hide. He pressed his lips together, his usual sharp remarks silenced by the weight of what he was hearing. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him that was rarely touched stirred. This wasn't just talent, this was truth. Amara reached the climax of her piece, a soaring, aching resolution that seemed to rise above the theater itself. Her fingers struck the keys with confidence now, no longer timid but commanding, as if to say, "This is me, this is my life, and you cannot ignore it." The sound swelled, wrapped around the audience, and then, just as suddenly it fell into softness. Her hands slowed, the melody gentler, more fragile, like a whisper after a storm. The final notes floated upward, delicate and pure, hanging in the air as if afraid to vanish. And then silence. Amara lifted her hands from the keys, her chest heaving. She kept her eyes closed for a heartbeat longer, afraid to face what came next. In her mind, doubt screamed, was it enough? Did they understand me? Or did I fail? When she finally opened her eyes, what she saw stunned her. The entire audience, every single person, was on their feet, not in chaotic cheering this time, but in an almost reverent ovation. People clapped with tears streaming down their faces, some simply standing with hands pressed to their hearts. The sound grew louder, wave after wave of applause crashing through the theater, until it felt like the walls themselves were vibrating with love. Amara's throat tightened. She had dreamed of an audience, but never this. Never such a tidal wave of acceptance. The camera cut to the judges' table. Heidi and Sophia were both standing, applauding with tears in their eyes. Howie rose too, clapping slowly but firmly, his expression one of awe. and Simon didn't move at first. He just stared at her, his lips parted slightly, his eyes glistening. Then, almost reluctantly, he pushed back his chair, stood, and began to clap. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't for show, it was real. The crowd roared louder, reacting not just to Amara, but to Simon's rare display of vulnerability. On stage, Amara's hands shook as she covered her mouth, overwhelmed. She looked toward the side of the stage, where her father was crying openly, his hands clasped as if in prayer. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the distance between Manila's alleyways and Hollywood's grand stage collapsed. They had made it here, together. For Amara, this was more than applause, it was proof that even a poor girl with no teacher, no fancy clothes, and no polished life could touch the hearts of thousands. Proof that music born from hardship could resonate louder than wealth or privilege. And somewhere in the storm of emotions sweeping the theater, she realized something else. She wasn't just playing to make her father proud anymore. She was playing to remind the world that greatness could come from anywhere, even the humblest corner of Manila. The storm of emotion she unleashed on that piano had transformed her life forever. The applause seemed endless, it rolled through the theater like thunder, wave after wave of hands crashing together, voices rising and tears falling. Amara sat frozen on the piano bench, her small fingers still trembling from the final note. She had dreamed of applause before, imagined it while sitting at her broken piano in Manila, but never this. Never a sea of strangers standing for her. The lights above glowed golden. Confetti machines stood waiting, silent but poised. Amara didn't know yet how close she was to the moment that would change her life. At the judge's desk, Heidi and Sophia were both wiping their eyes. Howie leaned forward, resting his chin on his hands, a rare softness on his face. But it was Simon everyone waited for. Simon Cowell, the judge who could crush a dream with a single sentence, the man known for his sharp tongue and high standards, sat still, staring at the 12-year-old girl on stage. The cameras zoomed in, his jaw was clenched, his eyes suspiciously glossy. For a long, heavy silence he didn't speak. The audience quieted too, anticipation rippling through the air like static. Finally, Simon leaned forward, pressing his hands together. His voice, when it came, was softer than anyone expected. "Mara," he said slowly, as though searching for the right words. "I've been doing this show for a long time. I've heard thousands of auditions. But what you just did," he paused, his voice catching slightly, "wasn't just playing the piano, it was telling your story, and it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard." Gasps and cheers erupted from the audience. Amara's eyes widened, her heart pounding. To hear such words from Simon, the man she had feared most, felt unreal. Simon shook his head, almost laughing at himself. "You know I don't cry easily. People think I'm tough, cold even. But tonight you reminded me why I love music, because it comes from the soul. And yours, Amara, is pure." His voice cracked on the last word. The camera caught the glisten of tears at the corner of his eyes. For millions watching at home, it was a rare sight. Simon Cowell vulnerable. The audience gasped, then erupted again, chanting, "Golden buzzer! Golden buzzer!" Gomara's hands flew to her mouth. She dared not hope. Could it really happen? Simon glanced at his fellow judges, then back at the little girl on stage. His lips curved into a smile, a genuine one, free of sarcasm or skepticism. Then, without hesitation, he stood. The theater roared. Simon placed his hand firmly on the golden buzzer in front of him. He looked up at Amara one last time and said simply, "This is your moment." Then he slammed his hand down. The buzzer lit up, glowing like the sun, and an explosion of golden confetti burst into the air. The audience screamed, standing as one, clapping, cheering, some even crying. The music swelled, filling the theater with triumph. Amara's knees buckled. She covered her face with her hands, tears spilling down her cheeks. For a moment the world blurred, confetti falling like golden rain, lights shining like stars, and the sound of thousands celebrating her name. Backstage, her father burst into sobs. A crew member touched his shoulder, urging him forward. "Go to her. Go." He ran onto the stage, his arms outstretched, his face streaked with tears. Amara saw him through the shower of gold and stumbled into his embrace. Father and daughter clung to each other, their bodies shaking with sobs, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. The audience, already on their feet, cheered louder, moved not just by the talent, but by the raw love between parent and child. Simon watched them, blinking rapidly, his hand still resting on the golden buzzer. His usual composure was gone. Instead, he allowed himself a small nod, as if to say, "Yes, this is why we do this show." On stage, Amara looked out through her tears at the audience, at the judges, at Simon. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. Her father kissed the top of her head and whispered, "Say it, Anak. Tell them." Through sobs, Amara managed to choke out, I just wanted to make my papa proud. And to show that even poor kids like me, we also have gifts." The theater erupted again, a mixture of cheers and sniffles. Simon pressed his hand to his chest, visibly moved. The other judges clapped harder, shouting encouragements. The camera panned across the audience, strangers hugging, wiping tears, children waving at her, parents holding their kids close. Amara's story had crossed oceans, shattered barriers and reached every heart in that room, and then, in a moment that sealed itself into AGT history, Simon stood again not as a judge but as a man deeply touched. He walked around the judge's desk and up the stairs to the stage. The crowd gasped, their cheers rising higher. Amara froze, her father still holding her hand as Simon approached. She looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes, unsure of what to do. Simon knelt slightly, so he was level with her. His voice, though quiet, carried through the microphone. Amara, you are proof that talent doesn't care where you come from, how much money you have, or what obstacles life gives you. You've reminded us all tonight that greatness can come from the most unexpected places, and I am so proud of you. He extended his arms. For a moment, the world seemed to stop as Amara stepped forward and hugged Simon Cowell. The man known for his distance, his sharp critiques, and his tough demeanor wrapped his arms around the little girl from Manila, golden confetti still falling around them. The audience went wild. People would later call it one of the most unforgettable golden buzzer moments in AGT history. Not just because of Amara's talent, but because of the rare, human side of Simon it revealed. Backstage crew members wiped their eyes. The judges stood, applauding as loudly as the crowd, and Amara, still clinging to her father and Simon, realized that her life had just changed forever. For one little girl who had learned music on a broken piano in a Manila alley, the golden buzzer was more than a ticket to the next round. It was proof that her story mattered. Proof that dreams born in poverty could still reach the grandest stages. Proof that the world could see her, hear her, and believe in her. And as the golden confetti continued to fall like blessings from heaven, Amara closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. For her father's faith, her family's love, and the chance to show the world her gift. The golden confetti had long settled onto the stage, but for Amara, the moment felt eternal. She stood there, holding her father's hand, her small frame trembling as the roar of the crowd echoed in her chest. When the music faded and the lights dimmed, she thought for a moment that she might wake up back in Manila, sitting at her broken piano in the dim glow of a single light bulb. But this was no dream. The stage hands gently guided her and her father backstage where crew members, still misty-eyed from what they had just witnessed, offered hugs and congratulations. One woman bent down to Amara's level, whispering, "Sweetheart, you just changed the world." Her father squeezed her hand tightly. He hadn't spoken much since the golden buzzer moment. His tears had done the talking. But now, as they sat on a small bench in the waiting area, he turned to her and said softly, "You see, Anak, I told you, one day the world would hear you, and tonight they did." Amara leaned against him, her heart swelling with pride and disbelief. But what neither of them knew yet was that the real storm was only beginning. Not on stage, but in the hearts of millions watching across the world. The global reaction that night. Clips of Amara's audition flooded social media. Her image, timid yet commanding at the piano, spread across platforms like wildfire. The video was shared, reposted, and translated into dozens of languages. Within hours, hashtags like Hammer on AGT and Golden Buzzer Girl were trending worldwide. Viewers from every corner of the globe commented, "I can't stop crying. She's proof that talent has no borders. This little girl is why I still believe in humanity." From a broken piano in Manila to the golden buzzer, this is the story we all needed. Filipino communities across the world rallied behind her. Pride swelled in the Philippines, where newspapers printed headlines like, "Pinay Girl Brings Simon Cowell to Tears." For many, Amara became more than just a contestant. She became a symbol of hope, a reminder that poverty did not define potential. Celebrities tweeted about her performance, praising her raw talent. Donations began pouring in, not just for Amara, but for her family and even her neighborhood back home. Organizations reached out offering scholarships, music lessons and support. And most touching of all were the messages from children who wrote, "Amara makes me believe I can do it too." The aftermath on stage. The morning after her audition aired, Amara and her father returned to the AGT studio for interviews. She wore the same simple dress. Her family couldn't afford more, but now it seemed like a gown, glowing with the pride of millions who believed in her. In one interview, a reporter asked, "Amara, what do you want the world to know about you?" Amara thought for a moment, then replied softly but firmly, "That even poor kids like me, we can have dreams. And sometimes, if we keep going, those dreams can come true." Her father placed a protective arm around her, tears threatening again. "She is proof," he said, "that nothing is impossible if you believe." The clip went viral within hours. Parents across America showed it to their children. Teachers played it in classrooms. Churches shared it during services. Amara's words, simple yet profound, became a mantra for anyone who had ever felt small, unseen or forgotten. Back home in Manila meanwhile, in the alleyway where Amara had once played her broken piano, the neighborhood gathered around small televisions and smartphones to watch her audition. The children who used to crowd her doorway cheered wildly, jumping and clapping when the confetti fell on screen. The old woman who had once told Amara's mother that her music eased her pain pressed her hands together, whispering prayers of gratitude. Neighbors brought flowers to her family's doorstep, as if Amara had already won the entire competition. For them she had carried their voices, their struggles, their hopes across an ocean, and placed them on the grandest stage in the world. A personal transformation for Amara, the golden buzzer was more than a moment of glory, it was a turning point in how she saw herself. All her life, she had been the poor girl from the alley, the one who sold vegetables in the market, the one who wore second-hand clothes, the one who whispered dreams she was too afraid to believe. Now, she was the girl who made Simon cry, the girl whose music touched the world. But Amara didn't let it make her proud in the wrong way. Instead, she felt a deep responsibility. If my music can touch people, she thought, then maybe I can use it to help others too. She began to dream bigger, not just of stages and trophies, but of building a music school one day, a place where kids like her, with no money for teachers, could still discover their gifts. The uplifting message weeks later, when Amara returned for the next round of AGT, she was more confident. The audience greeted her with cheers, waving signs with her name. She smiled shyly, waved, and sat at the piano again. Before playing, she looked into the camera and said, "This is not just for me. This is for every child who thinks they are too poor to dream. Don't give up. Because if someone like me can stand here, so can you." The theater erupted before she even played a note. Simon, sitting at the judge's desk, nodded with a soft smile. He had seen hundreds of contestants come and go, but he knew Amara was different. She wasn't just a performer. She was a messenger. A dream bigger than poverty. Amara's journey was far from over, but even if it had ended at the audition, her story was already complete. She had proven something timeless and universal. Greatness is not measured by wealth, opportunity, or circumstance. It is measured by the courage to keep going even when the odds are against you. As she stood on that stage with her father by her side, she realized the true gift was not the golden buzzer, or even the applause. It was the chance to show the world that the broken keys of a junk shop piano could still create music strong enough to move hearts across oceans. And that night, as she lay in her hotel room in Los Angeles, staring at the ceiling, she whispered the same prayer she had whispered back in Manila: "Thank you." Only this time, she knew someone, perhaps the whole world, had heard it.